Well, hello, everyone. So today we have a very special presentation from one of our club members who's going to be just showing us how to compile their own kernel. And maybe we'll be able to use this for classes or from. We shall see.
Welcome, Wade.
Welcome. All right, let me go ahead and share. And then.
Can you give a brief bio
Of myself. I'm some guy, and we're gonna be talking about the best kernel in the world until something better comes out.
supposedly?
What do you mean supposedly? All right. What is the Linux kernel? The kernel is created by Linus Torvalds in '91 at the University of Helsinki. He's still there. There's always controversy, but he's still there. It supports a lot of architectures, ARM, x86-64, RISC-V, many more. There's Apple ARM, the new silicon, is being developed. It's not in the all full function yet, but it's not. It's the first kernel support 64-bit, and it's only been on the only OS on Mars, so 100% Linux and supercomputers and a lot of other servers and stuff to use it. How do you use the tablet? I don't know. I hate Zoom. Proprietary software. So the kernel talks with the CPU and memory and your other hardware features so that your applications and your software can use it. There's a little chart like that. There is different channels or different releases of the Linux kernel because it's been going on since 1991. The current stable one is 5.17, and they're usually supported for a couple months, unless it's a long-term support, which is usually the last kernel of the year. So as you can see here, the 4.9 kernel has been around for it's gonna be supported for 9 years or something. So yeah, you can base your kernels off of there. And there's RC, the beta one, which is 5.18 now. So 5.17 is probably gonna be up for another 2 months or something. I don't know.
Do you know why the 5.10 version would be longer support than the other version?
Oh yeah, because they only support it for 2 years or something. Yeah, 5.15. Yeah, for about 2 years, unless they get support from enterprises. Unless they want to help support it for longer. And even though it says EOL, end of life, different companies like Red Hat and SUSE and other companies will support it for longer. But it's basically hey, if you guys want to support it, you can support it.
Kind of like support stuff, or they just kind of
There's a kernel.org is usually a good place to get your kernels. So yeah, there. I know Ubuntu, the new Ubuntu that just came out yesterday, the new LTS, uses the 5.15 kernel, which is the LTS, long-term support kernel. So here is the kernel tree. There's the in kernel and out of tree kernel modules. So in the kernel, you have different modules in there. So in kernel means it's supported in the main kernel tree. Out of tree kernel modules are code you can append to it. So Marcos could have his own kernel modules, and to get into the Linux source tree, there's a lot of things you have to go through. Might not have a good license, might be licensing issues and stuff like that. So that's where you have the out of tree kernel module. And this is usually when you want to have the fixed numbers. So you get a lot of issues with, so you have a new NVIDIA card, and NVIDIA, there is an in-tree kernel module called Nouveau, but you don't want to game on it. It's shit. So you need to have in the anime. I got the anime CPU. I had to. But you have to use NVIDIA proprietary if you want to actually use it properly. And so you have to compile that outside. and then make it into the kernel. Or I like OpenZFS, which is a file system. It's open source, but it's not Libre, so there's a lot of issues. And there's a lot of issues saying because it's created originally by Oracle. So that's but AMD, Intel is all in tree. The AMD kernel modules are actually huge for the AMD GPUs. Like a lot of codes in there for AMD GPUs. So that's why if you want to run like a gaming computer with Linux, it's better supported under AMD than in NVIDIA. But NVIDIA has actually been open sourcing some of this stuff. Which kernel should you use?
Oh, can I have a couple?
Which kernel you should use? Just use whatever that comes with your distribution. Just keep it updated. Run your updates.
Slackware is better.
Oh, as long as I have no system D, I'm good. Or there's install Gentoo. I like Gentoo. Or LFS Linux from scratch, but that's no life. Gentoo is easier to use. Here is make menu config. But if you're in the kernel, the source, buy a source folder and you do make menu config, it brings up this menu. And there's a lot of options you can configure your config file. Which is nice is you can say spend 2 hours of your life making sure it's like perfect and as minimal as you can get with just the right features that you need. Because also in the Linux kernel, you have like your Wi-Fi drivers, your Bluetooth. There's even like RGB like fans and there's a bunch of stuff in there. And if you save that file, then every time you update your kernel, you just bring in that file, and you don't have to worry about reconfiguring your kernel. So yeah, I think before they have a bunch of stuff there. And then here, you can do your CPU instruction set. So you can go in there and just have the features of your CPU and nothing else. If you want a more minimalistic kernel. But if you have a hard drive and it's for like an AMD system and then you plug it into an Intel system, it's not going to work. So you have to recompile it all or just start from scratch. So, but Gentoo does now support a kernel binary. You can just download a kernel binary file for Gentoo. If you hear me, Tim, you don't have to compile your kernel in Gentoo now anymore. So yeah. Here's the network section. So if you want certain network features, so if you have just Ethernet, you don't want Wi-Fi, you can just not compile any of those modules in there. So it's a leaner kernel. And then the graphics selection, the graphics drivers. Yeah, you can see a AMD GPU. Because if you compile with the AMD GPU settings on, and you have just an all Intel laptop, it's gonna take forever. Because I'm pretty sure the AMD GPU is like one of the biggest, if not the biggest, as of lines of code and code base. It's huge. But if you don't need it, don't compile it. Don't need it. The hybrid graphics is good for laptops. Yeah, Linux is everywhere. It is. So, any questions?
Great job, Wade.
Yes, I got a question.
What's your question?
So you show this GUI
Which GUI?
that looks like it's from like the 90s or 80s.
This?
Yeah. How did you get that?
Make menu config. Menu config.
Oh, so you just type in make menu config.
If you're in I think it's, I don't know how to say it, but if you're like in the source code directory.
Okay. And there's a lot of options here, it looks like. How do you know?
No,
what
there
options
is tons. You could probably spend a couple hours.
How do you know what options you need?
Well, if you hit I think it's / on the keyboard, it brings up a little like oh no, is it question mark? It'll give you a little bit information about But I find the laziest way to do it is just find a good config off the internet. And then just build off there if you're really that, you know? Or you can look at like configs from, you know, like different distributions and stuff. Because you could find those. Or you could always just download the bin. It's like honestly just if what use whatever. But it is nice to have like a newer kernel. If your laptop or your especially laptops, if it's like brand new. Because if a lot of that stuff is in the kernel, in tree. So if you have like a new the new Intel CPUs, new laptop CPUs, it's not in right now, it's not in 5.15.
That was quite.
Isn't you have to get the newer kernel. I know Ubuntu's backporting so that their kernel can have it. So if you're on the newer, or like when I first got my laptop, the older kernels, like screen rotation wouldn't work or something like that. But then the newer kernels has all that stuff in there. So there is times when you want to have the newer kernel than just the older ones.
That's interesting. On my older laptop,
Yeah.
I actually had to go into some of those settings.
Yeah.
But it's like the Windows driver settings. And I had to disable the touchscreen function of that laptop because I broke that module. So I had to disable that function.
Like the touchscreen on the.
Yeah, because if you tried to run it,
Yeah.
it would glitch around, it would
Oh,
crash.
but is there any BIOS?
That was in the BIOS.
Yeah. Well, if you can figure out what kernel module it is, or I don't know how you can figure it out.
It was a very interesting experience. It's like I had to position the screen at an angle where it's still, where like the touch module wasn't properly working.
Yeah.
And then maneuver through that in that position to disable it, and then I was able to.
Oh shit. So the screen wouldn't work?
The screen would not work properly. I had to like have it flipped upside down
Yeah.
so that like the module was disconnected and work through the BIOS settings.
So if you turn the touchscreen off and it started working?
Because that's one of the things is like
That's
if
weird.
the screen was cracked,
Yeah.
it would say that it was receiving multiple inputs.
Oh, okay.
That it was not a fun experience to try to figure out how that all worked
No.
together, but I was able to go in
Yeah.
similar to like how you would disable different modules or
Yeah, you just. Yeah. So I've had that issue, right? I compile. I'm like, oh, I put it in my laptop or whatever, and then I'm like, oh, I got a new hard drive for my laptop, a new SSD for my laptop. I said, let me just put this in my desktop, and I didn't boot. I'm like, oh, that's right, because I had it set for an Intel processor on the CPU when it's an AMD desktop one. But if you get your config file, and then usually once you're done, you can exit out, and then just use make, and then give it threads if you want, like the J5 or whatever threads you want to give it. You can have networking. It's pretty easy to understand if you get familiar with it. But honestly, I don't spend that much time in there. Because if you can get a good config, there's no reason to do it unless you get new hardware. Yeah, or if you get like I don't know, whatever, you switch over to NVIDIA card, then you'd want to get the NVIDIA Evoke drivers in there.
I think Windows 11 has a function where whenever you change out specific parts of the computer, it'll try to auto detect those drivers.
Oh yeah, it does that. I'm trying to.
The most up to date for that model.
Yes, but having it in the kernel has been great because before AMD GPUs weren't in the kernel. AMD GPUs used to be like even worse than NVIDIA on Linux. But it's like 2016, I think, around there, they started putting it in the kernel. So it's good, but there's certain things like I really like using OpenZFS over in the corner. It's a file system, and it's really nice and stable. But there's licensing issues so it can't be in the tree. So whenever there's a new version of Linux, a new like 5 dot whatever, then they I have to wait for OpenZFS to update to support it. So that's why it's good to have like OTS kernels. Or if it works, yeah. So that is the kernels. And then the RC ones are just beta. Like I think they're like 5.18.RC, like 6 or 8 or something. And it's about every week to come up new RC kernels. Yeah, that's bad. Yeah. But really, if you just want to use it, just use the one.
Use the one that comes.
Honestly,
Stable version.
yeah, and there's different ones like there's like Linux Zen. There's some edit that harden you can do, but if you're just using it, I mean, keep it up to date. Just update it. You know. But I had to throw in some memes in there. I'll be honest.
I mean, that's kind of what I do with Ubuntu. Like every time I start up my
Yeah.
computer, I want to make sure I have the most recent version. Otherwise,
Well, you don't have to.
that's the thing though, is like every time I check for new updates, it's like, oh, you have 6 more.
Oh, unless you use something like Arch where there's like 10 updates every second. But yeah, just use whatever it comes. Unless you have like brand new hardware within the last 3 months or something, then that's when you usually get it. When you need the new kernel, or if you get way better performance than the kernel. But yeah, so the kernel is just getting bigger and bigger, all the modules and stuff. But it's like, do I really need like all the support for all the wireless cards when I don't have it? So it's just minimizing kernel.
That laptop from 2017, it doesn't have Bluetooth.
Bluetooth's not very secure.
It's not.
Bluetooth, yeah, I like it. Bluetooth is useful when it can connect. When it connects, but the second it can't connect, yeah, like Linux crash. You ever saw like crashing Linux?
I don't think I've ever had it. I've definitely got like a blue screen.
I've had kernel connect, but only by using a Fedora on the beta.
Oh, because that would be a
Yeah, it's completely unstable. Yeah, but when that works, I think. But yeah, yeah, I've seen some like terminals and some stuff where they're using some old version, and these numbers over here, like, where is it? These numbers are arbitrary. Like each new like dot, it's a new version, but like the difference between 4 and 5. Yeah.
Like they release it in bulk.
Yeah, it's just whenever Linus decides I want a new number. Like when they're going to 6, I don't know. I do know that they're switching it now, but the kernel is in C89. I think it's GNU 89. So it's GNU C. But they're going to switch it over to 11. So there's certain things you can't do. You can't have any new features in the kernel. But I have no idea. This is me of all my college classes. Oh,
There's a lot of things that can go wrong. A lot of times you don't really understand.
I'm just surprised the things work as good as they do.
That's true.
That's all I just know.
What about you online people? You got any questions for our presenter?
Oh, shit, to have a.
So do you online people got any other questions for our presenter?
Nope.
Nothing in particular. Thank you, though.
Install
Can I
Gen
use
2.
a Linux kernel in Windows?
Oh, WSL?
No,
Ooh.
no. Can I use the Linux kernel for Windows?
Why would you? Why would you even want such a thing?
Because Windows is just better, right?
If Windows is better, just use the Windows kernel. Because if Windows is better, then wouldn't the Windows kernel be better than the Linux kernel? So why don't you just use that?
Oh, good point. Good point. Well, because you were talking about the Linux kernel, so why don't you just put the Linux kernel in Windows?
Why doesn't just Microsoft just buy up Linux?
I mean, could they?
Are they with the Linux Foundation?
Okay, I'm messing around, but
It'd be a sad reality if they can actually pull that off.
WSL 2 is the future.
I mean, that's what I had to use for my classes.
They buy every single Linux flavor possible under the sun.
it's still recording. I can stop that if you want.